further into bodybuilding I got, the more extreme it got. The more sacrifices I made from a health perspective, and also the more I realised how detrimental it was.
That must have took a lot of courage because, I mean, you create an identity around it, right, as a person, but also a coach.
I knew that pushing through that discomfort was what I was supposed to do and would get me to a place where I was truly happy again.
So obviously, as you say, like in your bio, it's all about kind of restoring your health and that life, like post-dieting period. And that's an incredibly important conversation because obviously there are so many girls that are, whether they get on stage or not, right, they're dieting to quite kind of extremes, and that's not always sustainable and healthy. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about your journey with that. Like, what made you interested in bikini comps in the first place, and how have we ended up here where you now work with clients to kind of restore that life post-show?
Yeah, so I got into sport from a very young age. I started playing football when I was 12. And I was the kind of person through my teens who threw myself into everything. I was part of like every sport team. I did running, football, gymnastics, trampolining. And then as you get into your late teens, obviously you lose touch with a lot of those sports teams and you sort of fall out of it a little bit. And I started training. Well, I started training. When I initially started training when I was about 14, 15 years old, I went to a local gym with my mom and I did what everyone does and just did, 5 or 10 minutes on a cardio machine and then did the basic resistance machines that I knew how to use and navigate. I wasn't following any sort of structured program or anything like that. And then I fell into doing, have you heard of Kayla at Signs?
Yeah, that sounds familiar on Instagram.
She had guides called the BBG.
Really?
So I started doing those at like 10 p.m. at night in my bedroom most days, and also started going to the gym alongside that. And as my sports sort of died down a little bit, I invested more time into training and that sort of replaced that. And then I joined a gym on my own when I became the age where you're actually allowed to join a gym, because that was when I was going with my mom. And I started going to all the classes. I started resistance training. I started following some workouts on bodybuilding.com, and I was in the gym all the time. So by the time I'd done my sort of A-levels, the gym manager had said to me, if you ever want a job here, you've got one, by the way. So I was originally going to go to uni and do sport and exercise science. I had an offer, but I was like, hang on a minute, is this really the right thing for me? And I could just go into personal training straight away. So I decided to do my PT course, and after must have been about 6 months of working as a PT, obviously whilst I was resistance training, I'd started to develop muscle tissue, and one of the other PTs said to me, look, have you ever thought about competing? And at the time I had heard of bodybuilding. I'd followed quite a few like YouTubers like Nikki Blackter, some of the like OGs, and it appealed to me. So I always had a competitive streak to me, so I was like, why not? This is the next challenge. It's an opportunity to push myself, see what I'm capable of, and it's probably an opportunity to put myself through a similar process to what my clients would go through as well. So I decided to start bodybuilding, pretty much started my first prep straight away, with no real structure before that, which was probably a bad move, but anyway. And then did my first season in 2016. My first show, I would say that I wasn't in true condition, and I loved it, but the prep wasn't anywhere near as like extreme as what my preps were towards the end. And bodybuilding at the time was very much a part of my life rather than something that consumed me. And I had a very knowledgeable coach who I learned so much from. So the whole process was enjoyable and it wasn't so extreme. But then I competed again in 2017, 2018, and took 2019 as an improvement season. And my last season was 2020. And the further into bodybuilding I got, the more extreme it got. And the more sacrifices I made from a health perspective, and also the more I realised how detrimental it was. Because in my first sort of season, I didn't quite realise how much, like, losing my menstrual cycle, for example, would have an impact on my health. I was quite naive to that. And I suppose at the time I was kind of like, well, if I don't have a period, it's not the end of the world. It's quite convenient, really. And I think at the time, a lot of people were wearing that sort of thing as a bit of a badge of honour, whereas now people are much more aware of the negative effects that come with that. So yeah, the further into my bodybuilding journey I got, the more extreme it got. And it very much started to consume my entire life. Like towards the end, it was all I thought about. All of my friends, my boyfriend at the time, were bodybuilders. And I'd very much just become the stereotypical bodybuilder who was like chasing their pro card. It was my entire life. And I was like, wait, I've lost a lot of myself here. And like, what am I actually doing this for anymore? So that's where I really started to question that and then came away from it. But yeah, it took me a long time to do that. And I think sometimes you don't realise what you're doing until you take a step back, and the impacts of what you're doing until you take a step back. And my initial reason for getting into personal training was I always loved helping people, and I wanted to help women progress towards their goals whilst actually improving their health and quality of life. But the further I got into bodybuilding, I then started to coach bodybuilders as well, because it became my entire life. But I always had this sort of like inner internal conflict when I was coaching bodybuilders, because I cared so much about my clients, but I was pushing them through this process that I knew would have a negative impact on their health. So I kind of, once I realised that bodybuilding was no longer right for me, I then took a step back from coaching competitors as well, because I realised that wasn't right for me. And I feel like I came back to my original values, my original reason for getting into the industry, as opposed to like getting lost and just going with the flow and doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I love that. That must have took a lot of courage, because I mean, you create an identity around it, right, as a person, but also a coach. And I imagine at first you probably lost quite a lot, like friendship groups, clients, when you took that step away.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I still have a really good relationship with all of the clients that I did coach and prep, and they were so understanding. So I'm so grateful for all of them for being that way. But it was a really hard decision, because it was my entire identity, both personally and professionally. And in 2020, I also went through a breakup with a guy who was a bodybuilder as well. So it was like, it kind of felt like my life had been flipped upside down, but I knew that pushing through that discomfort was what I was supposed to do and would get me to a place where I was truly happy again, and I was actually acting in line with my values. So yeah, it was difficult at first, but I knew that it was going to be worth it. And at the time, when I was still coaching competitors, but I knew it wasn't right for me, I was waking up every single day feeling anxious. So I knew that something had to change. And immediately as I made that decision and told all my clients, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know that kind of can be difficult to talk about. And that was kind of going to be my next question, which you just kind of answered, is what was it that made you realise you weren't kind of living in line with your values? And you've just said like you're waking up feeling anxious every day, which obviously is not
Pretty
good.
much, especially it got to that sort of time was towards the end of a bodybuilding season where I had a lot of clients competing. And so every single day I was waking up to a lot of client check-ins, because it was their peak weeks and things like that. So at the very end of their preps, when they're the most malnourished and the most unhealthy. So that was causing me a lot of conflict and feelings of anxiety. So I was like, something needs to change. And when it comes to myself, I came to the realization, because I did my shows in 2020 and I kind of didn't feel the same feeling of like accomplishment, and I didn't enjoy the show days anywhere near as much as what I had done previously. And I was like, like something's changed here. This has maybe become something that is taking more from me than it's actually offering me, because I'm not getting that feeling of this prep has been 100% worth it. And I'm not getting those feelings of excitement and accomplishment anymore. So that sort of changed, and my attitude towards the process changed. And I think that was largely because in that last prep, like a lot of people, I used it as a bit of a coping mechanism as well, because I was going through that breakup. So I fully immersed myself into it, and that created quite like a negative relationship with it, and I just shut off from everything.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you reflect on that, because yeah, like so similar. For me, there was such an internal conflict when it was like I felt anxious about my client check-ins who are competitors, because it was like obviously you feel a lot of pressure, they want to be ready on time, they want to do well, but you know that really you're pushing them to a point where like this isn't good for their health, and that was just, it just felt crap.
Yeah, and it's a mental battle, isn't it? Because like I was coaching a lot of competitors who had a lot of potential as well. So obviously I wanted them to achieve their goals, and I wanted them to win their shows and stuff, because I knew that was what they wanted. But it still made me feel really uncomfortable doing that. I don't know if you felt the same.
Yeah, literally that. And I was like, yeah, it just didn't align, as you've said, it just didn't align with my values as a coach and why I got into the industry. So for anyone that kind of thinks, whether they're a coach or whether they're, you know, just a person that's like, okay, I'm dieting, whether that's for a show or not, and they're maybe thinking the same, they're like, I'm not sure if this aligns with my values. Was there any kind of process that you went through in terms of getting clear on what those values were and like helping you identify them?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you ever feel that sort of feeling of internal conflict, it is quite likely that you're a bit out of alignment and something needs to change. So trust that feeling, like trust your intuition. And then when it comes to identifying what your values are, first of all, like a good starting point is just like go online, have a look at what some core values are, and like have a think, okay, which ones stand out to me? Which ones am I drawn to? But then you need to get more specific. So something that I often get clients to do is think about, as they're going through their life, okay, if they ever feel a moment of like peace and joy and like true happiness, write that moment down on the notes in their phone. And then the reverse of that, if they're ever in a scenario with a person or like doing something that makes them feel like drained or unhappy, or angry or irritable, then again, make a note of that. And then you can have a look back at that over time, and you'll have this list of things that makes you feel good and makes you feel like you're your best self, and you'll have this list of things which does the opposite, and that can really help you narrow down what your values are, and then you can work from there and use those as a bit of a compass as you navigate life. Yeah,
that's really smart. People don't write that stuff down enough, do they?
No.
Yeah,
I love journaling.
So valuable.
And that's a quick way of getting clients to kind of like think about writing things down without it feeling like a massive task, because they just get the notes on their phone up and write something quick down when they notice they're feeling a certain way, without them having to be like, I'm going to spend half an hour journaling in my written journal. So I think it can be a good starting point and a good way for people to recognise what makes them tick and what makes them feel good.
Did you find that when you said to your clients, hey, I'm not coaching competitors anymore, sorry, and you explained why, did any of them turn around and go, do you know what, actually that's been a bit of a awakening for me, I think you're right, like this doesn't align with my values either, please keep coaching me lifestyle? Or did they all go, cool, I'm carrying on with comp?
Yeah, it's so funny you should say that, because one of my clients in particular stands out, who I still coach now. She won't mind me saying this because we've spoken about it on my podcast. She's called Tamsin, and she was going to compete again. And then when I said that, she was like, oh, actually, I just want to work with you. She was like, can you carry on coaching me? I was like, yeah, of course I can. I mean, I'd said to all of them, like, I'll carry on coaching you as long as you want. I just won't take you through your next prep. So if you want to do like an improvement season with me, you can. So she said, I'll stay on, I'll see how I get on. And she's not competed to this day. And she realised that that wasn't the right goal for her. So that's been quite like amazing to watch, really, because it's hard. I suppose it just goes to show that you as a coach can have quite a big influence on your clients. Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it? I don't know about you, but like I think we've been coaching a similar amount of time, like a really long time in a way, but also not like too long. Yeah. And it took me so long to get my head around the fact that like clients kind of value your opinion of them and want your approval in a way, and like place a lot of weight on the words you say. I'll have people come up to me and they'll be like, do you remember when you told me this when we were at David Lloyd, which is where I first started when I was like 18? I'll be like, I don't remember saying that to you. And they'll like remember what I've said to them about a cappuccino. Like this woman literally came up to me the other day, so I went back to David Lloyd and she was like, you were the first person that told me that there was like calories in a cappuccino versus like an Americano, and like bear that in mind. And I was like, how do you remember that? Yeah, it's so funny. I think a lot of the clients that I worked with one-to-one back in 2015, they still follow me on social media, and every now and again one of them will reach out and say, by the way, I just want to tell you how much of an impact you had on my life. Like, I'm still training, and you know what you did for me has changed my life. And I'm like, I can't believe you even remember me. Like, I remember every single client that I've ever coached down to a T, but often you think, oh, they won't remember me, like I was just their trainer, but they actually do, and that's really lovely. And I still actually coach one of my first ever clients, one of my first ever one-to-one clients.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, same. I've got loads, and it's a really nice feeling, isn't it? And
yeah,
sounds really cliche, but there is a lot of responsibility that comes with that. I think most coaches, like a great lesson for them would be to realize like how much responsibility and power you do have.
yeah. 100%, and it's incredible, but you've obviously got to use it correctly. And there are a lot of people in the industry who don't do so.
Yeah, but obviously you kind of did the right thing by yourself, your values, and it sounds like by some of your clients as well, and helping them to realize that maybe it wasn't kind of right for them. So anyone that's listening to that and goes, okay, yeah, maybe that sounds like me too, like whether it's a coach wanting to prep clients or whether it's an individual potentially looking to compete, like what would you say to them if they feel like, yeah, maybe this isn't for me anymore, but I don't really know how to step away. Maybe it's because I feel like a failure. Maybe I feel like I'm letting my coach down, or any advice you could kind of give to that person in terms of how to step away?
Yeah, I know it's a really difficult process to go through and a really difficult decision to make, especially if competing has been your entire life for years on end and it's something that you've identified with. But the first thing I'd say is to take the pressure off. Remember that like you don't have to announce anything to the world. You can make this decision silently. And that's what I did at first. I was like, right, okay, I'm just going to, I'm not going to announce that I'm taking a step back on social media. I'm just going to kind of experiment with different training styles, allow myself to take a little bit of a step back, kind of make that decision in my head, but see how I feel having made that decision and not announce it on social media. So yeah, don't be afraid to make the decision silently. And remember that you can always change your mind. Like nothing is ever set in stone. So that can be really reassuring, because if you decide to take a step back from competing or coaching competitors, you can always go back to it, especially if you don't announce it to the world. It's so easy to then go back into it. So remembering that you've got nothing to lose and you've got so much to gain if you feel like it is the right decision for you to take that step back, because you're not going to be able to feel, perform and function as your best self personally or professionally if you are acting out of alignment and if you're not doing what's right for you. Even when it comes down to me waking up feeling anxious every day, like you're not going to be able to make the best decisions professionally. You're not going to be able to show up as your best self within your check-ins, within client calls, things like that, for friends, for family, if you're feeling anxious every day. So you've got to do what's right for you. And also, I think something that's really reassuring is that, first of all, a lot of people will respect you for doing what's right for you and making hard decisions. And second of all, people care way less. I know it sounds brutal, but people care way less about you than you actually think. And they probably
Which
won't.
I find so empowering.
Yeah, but it's great. It's such a great fact, because you think that you making the decision to move away from competing is going to be the end of the world and everyone's going to notice, everyone's going to be talking about it. But in reality, no one really cares.
Yeah. People have their own shit going on.
Yeah, people have got their own stuff. Everyone's so consumed with their own decisions. And so, yeah, not as many people will notice. And if they do, they'll forget about it in a very short period of time. And the people who do matter will respect you for that decision and will support you fully in that decision if it's right for you. And people like people being open and honest and vulnerable. So if you're open about, maybe not as you're going through it, but if you're open about your own journey and you share that, you'll be able to have a positive impact on others through sharing that, and you'll get people engaged in your own story, whatever it is.
Have you found that yourself kind of being willing to be a little bit vulnerable and share that story, have you found that that's been like useful for you as a coach in terms of gaining clients, gaining their trust, getting them to communicate with you more? Yeah,
definitely. And it's been good for me in terms of attracting the type of clients that are right for me. I think that people forget about that when they're trying to market their business. They're like, oh, I'll just do X, Y, and Z because everyone does that and that's how you grow a business. But if you're marketing in a way that doesn't suit you and the type of clients you're trying to attract, you'll attract the wrong type of people and they will be very short-lived clients. Your turnaround will be very quick. And it's like, would that really make you feel fulfilled? And is that really what you want? Or do you want to attract clients that are right for you, that are sort of in alignment with your own business values and what you want to put out into the world, because they're the clients that are going to stick around over the long term, who you're going to have a really good connection with and who you're going to really enjoy coaching. So if you share your own journey, I think you attract the right people for you, and then that creates a much more fulfilling service and day-to-day life, really.
Yeah, 100%. And as you said there as well, it's actually a better business model. It might be slightly less profitable short term, but actually your retention will be better. As you said, your alignment will be better. So you'll be acting and showing up on social media and marketing in a way that's more authentic and has more energy, which means it's only going to be better for business long term anyway.
Exactly. And if I wasn't to have shared the journey that I've been through, and I was just to have shut off, like I wouldn't have been able to help people in the way that I have, who have been through a similar journey or are going through a similar journey. And they probably wouldn't be able to open up to me as freely. It's like I'll often get messages from people who are struggling post-show now, or who have decided they want to take a step back from competing and are really struggling with that decision. And those people wouldn't have reached out to me if I didn't share the journey that I've been on. So yeah, I think it's really, really valuable to share that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. You've got to be kind of prepared to lead from the front in that, don't you? If you're not telling that story and being prepared to be vulnerable, you can't ask clients to be.
Exactly.
Something you mentioned earlier, which is definitely a lot more talked about now, which is incredible. It's kind of the lost menstrual cycle, being associated with competing, or even for some girls, not necessarily competing, but just dieting in general, they can lose it, unfortunately. And obviously, a lot more people are talking about that now, which is amazing. We kind of know that it is a problem and why it's a problem. But for anyone listening that's like still not really too sure what that is, why that happens, or why I should care about it, just talk me kind of through that, if that's okay.
Yeah, so obviously we as women have menstrual cycles, and the regularity or our menstrual cycle function as a whole, our hormone health as a whole, can be impacted through dieting, often as a result of spending periods of time in a state of low energy availability. And what that means is essentially we have limited energy available for bodily functions. So our energy availability is the amount of energy we have available after things like training, walking, cardio, all of that, the stuff that's left over. And our menstrual cycle function, it's a very energy expensive process. So our body will sacrifice that essentially to keep us alive. So when we have limited energy available, our body will be like, right, okay, we don't need menstrual cycle function. She's not going to be producing babies anytime soon, and we need to keep her alive. But there are a lot of negatives to that go far beyond our ability to get pregnant. And I think that's what's overlooked, because a lot of people, when they're dieting for photo shoots or they're competing in bodybuilding, they'll have the mindset of, well, I don't want kids right now, so it's fine. I'll sort that later. Yeah. But they completely overlooked things like the effects on bone mineral density that can have. And also something which isn't often mentioned is that when we do spend a long period of time in a state of low energy availability and we sacrifice menstrual cycle function, it makes us more prone to these irregularities and the shutdown of menstrual cycle function again. So we have much less resilience to things like dieting. And then a lot of people, once they have restored menstrual cycle function, if they ever want to push their limits with training again, or they want to diet again, they'll often find that they're much more prone to experiencing these negative effects again. So that can be quite hard. And I've actually had a lot of clients who've really struggled with that, because they wanted to push their limits with training, but whenever they do it, they see their menstrual cycle function be impacted. They either have irregular or absent cycles. And they know they're very aware of obviously the negative effects that can come with that now. So it's quite scary. And when you, as a woman, this probably applies to men as well, but as a woman, when you haven't got a cycle or your cycle is irregular, it's quite a horrible feeling. It kind of feels like you're broken and your body's working against you and not with you. And it's not nice at all. So it can send people into a bit of a panic if they have an irregular cycle or an absent cycle. So I think the psychological effects of that are quite under-talked about, so to speak. But yeah, so we essentially lose our cycles due to spending that period of time in a state of low energy availability, and or in combination with stress, which again is massively overlooked. Like, people can lose their periods if they go through like periods of grief and things like that as well. So stress has a huge impact on menstrual cycle function, and people often overlook that.
Yeah, that's not spoke about enough, for sure. And those two are obviously very interconnected, because, dieting is obviously a stressor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just kind of paint that picture a little bit, if that's okay, Danny. Like, obviously you're dieting because you're on prep. Prep's kind of stressful. There's other lifestyle stress. Like, how do those things kind of all come together?
Yeah, so it's just like a perfect storm of everything, which creates that. environment which our body is not able to function properly. So yeah, it's a hard one. And from personal experience as well, every single time I went into a prep, I lost my menstrual cycle almost immediately. And I also was listening to a podcast from Victoria Felcar, who's brilliant. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Yeah, of course.
And she was talking about the fact that obviously a lot of women are put on the pill quite early on.
Yeah.
She was talking about the impacts that can have on someone's resilience to stress and resilience to that being in that state of low energy availability as well. And she was saying how they tend to be much more prone to losing their menstrual cycle or experiencing irregularities if they've been on things like birth control in the past, or if you've like had a history of dieting from a young age and you've lost your period early on as well. So that's something to take into account. And stress is accumulated over time, and there are many different forms of stress. So people often don't recognize the fact that training is a stressor. And obviously when we go into a fat loss phase, especially if it's a bodybuilding prep, we're often doing quite high volumes of training. And if it's a bodybuilding prep, it's often pushed to train to failure very regularly. So you've got a lot of physical stress, and then you've also got the psychological stress of, am I going to be ready in time? I'm stressing about whether I can eat my next meal on time. I'm stressing about fitting my cardio in, getting my work done. I'm stressing over, I don't know, if you've got a work deadline as well as the prep. There's so many different things that will accumulate and have an impact on your overall health. And then, like I said, the fact that you're in that state of low energy availability, which most people can't avoid going into in order to get stage lean. I think a lot of coaches these days are like, they'll kind of show off. They'll use an example of a client who's managed to maintain a regular cycle throughout prep. And they're like, oh, look at this client. Like, she's managed to stay healthy throughout her entire prep. And it's like, there are people who can do that, but they're usually outliers. And it's not a result of the prep protocols. It's their genetics and their predispositions and their environment. So that can be quite damaging, I think, for people to see.
I really like you've said that.
Yeah.
I've always found that really odd when I've read that. That's not really anything to do with you as a coach.
I know, it's literally nothing to do with the prep or the coach. And people will see that and they'll be like, oh, it is possible to prep healthily. Yeah. And this coach is amazing because they've managed to keep menstrual cycle function intact. And it's like, no, that's due to the client's predisposition, their genetics, their natural set point, that sort of thing. And you can't really control for all of that. So it's quite frustrating when you see that. And I think for anyone who is seeing it, just bear in mind that it's not down to the coach or the protocols, it's down to the individual.
Especially if it's like their first diet, because they don't have what you just touched on, which is this accumulation of stress on the body over years. So you might look at that as a guy, okay, well, I've done a few shows, my cycle's gone the last couple, okay, it's a problem with how I'm approaching it, whereas actually that was just always going to happen as a result of the build up of doing back-to-back seasons.
Yeah. And I think another thing as well that I notice is a lot of people will think, oh, it's fine because post-show my period always comes back when I reach this scale weight or at this amount of time post-show, but they fail to recognise that the more preps they do, the more time they spend in this high stress, low energy availability state, the harder it's going to be to recover.
Yeah.
And so it's not like their cycle's always going to come back at when they get to 60 kilos or, 2 months post show. And I think a lot of people are a bit naive to that.
Yeah, 100%. I did quite a lot of digging into that, and I found a couple of good research papers that were kind of showing it wasn't anything to do with body weight, but like muscle mass. And I think that's like another thing that's often a problem in the industry is a lot of the biggest educators are guys. And then you look at how they train, right? And you look at the information you're putting out, but there is a few things that obviously work differently in female physiology. And if you're a guy, it's probably a case of, you get your body weight back to whatever, maybe body fat percentage back to whatever, and everything's good again. But in females, it seems to be a little bit different, and the amount of muscle mass like really impacts that as well.
Right,
so, which is why every show you might need to push that body weight number back up a little bit more than it previously was before, because it takes a little bit longer maybe to build that muscle back on after. If you're like, I'm exhausted from training, everything hurts a little bit, I'm in a low hormonal state. If you've lost your cycle, so obviously building muscle is going to take a little bit longer. And just knowing that then can like help you to navigate that and be like, okay, cool, it's not real. I'm not really chasing this body weight here, because then I used to see this a lot. Girls are like, I need to get back to this body weight. They'd chase that body weight. They'd gain a lot of body fat. to get back to that body weight. They'd then be really unhappy with their body fat percentage. They'd then be stressed about the fact their cycle wasn't back, even though they were at the weight that they were when they started prep. And just because they didn't know that it maybe was also to do with the amount of muscle mass they had, we've now just got not a nice situation to be in, right? And I've had that conversation with like some pretty big bikini girls in the industry. Obviously, if you don't know that, then yeah, you're just going to chase scale weight at the expense of body fat. And then you're like, well, I haven't got my cycle back and I'm unhappy with my body composition. And then that's just a crap place to be because you've got neither, right?
And then on top of that, going back to stress, you know, if someone does a prep and they go through a traumatic event or something during that prep, but then they still expect, or, you know, like, I'm going to get my cycle back at this body weight. And after this period of time, you have to take into account, you might have to wait a little bit longer this time around because of what you've been through and the compounding effects of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's such a valid point. I think it's so important to understand how individualized it can be, because you're in quite like it's not always the best place from a mental well-being standpoint, is it? So you don't really want to have additional stressors because you expect something to occur at a certain way or a certain date. And then when that doesn't happen, it just causes more stress, when actually it might just be that's how it is for you.
Yeah. And I think with that in mind as well, a lot more people should take into account that it doesn't make you any more or less of a person whether you compete or not, and the stage is always going to be there. So if you're really struggling through a prep, say you're going through a really stressful event, maybe just come out of the prep and do it at a later date if you can, because you're not going to produce the best version of yourself getting on stage anyway when you're going through a really stressful period throughout prep. And on top of that, you're probably going to see many more negative health effects as a result of that. So is it really worth pushing through just for the sake of stepping on stage on this certain date or doing this specific show? Like, can you just take a little bit of a break and come back to it?
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so important. I think a lot of people don't realize how stress and inflammation can affect, obviously, how they look, especially when you're stage lean. So actually you might be doing yourself a disservice to how you place as well by actually just pushing through and quitting, whilst it's not really quitting, but quitting for the sake of giving it a word is actually sometimes not a cop out at all. It doesn't mean you failed. It's actually the best thing for you and for your stage goals.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was definitely me by the end of 2020. Like, I don't think that my physique was looking its best. I'd start to waste away a little bit.
Yeah, so then what's the point?
Yeah.
You're not going to get the placing you deserve anyway.
Exactly.
And it's just going to be worse for you. So take a break, come back. Yeah, the stage isn't going anywhere. I love that. The sport's not going anywhere. So I think, you've just done an amazing job of kind of explaining that situation that so many women are in, whether it's because of contest prep or they're just dieting in general. So how do we kind of break that cycle? Obviously, there's a lot there. I think it can feel quite overwhelming, can't it? And a little bit like, I don't know how to break this. Like, where would you kind of, if a client comes to you and that's kind of the situation they're in, they've maybe lost their cycle post-show or post-diet, they're maybe scared of gaining a little bit of body weight, they don't really want to up their calories. Where do you start with that?
First of all, I would remove as much stress as possible. And I think there's a lot to be said for working with a coach during that period of time so that you've got that support and you've got that guidance, because it's so hard to be objective with yourself and it can just cause more stress if you're trying to make those decisions for yourself. And it's a hard process to go through. So if you're trying to coach yourself through this kind of process, you're probably going to hold yourself back. It's going to take a lot longer than if you had guidance, because you're probably not going to be willing to lean into the discomfort of doing what is necessary to get to that good place where you feel your best. So work with a coach first and foremost. If someone came to me in that scenario, I would first have a chat with them and obviously discuss what they've been through, where they're currently at, and try and get them to think about why they're doing what they're doing and why doing the work that we're about to do, because it's going to be uncomfortable, why that's going to benefit their lives, and get them to recognise the opportunities that present themselves through that process, rather than focusing on the things that they feel like they have to sacrifice, such as condition. You know, they're going to have to gain some body fat. It can be a really, really difficult process to go through. If they're focused on that, it's going to make the process so much harder. Whereas if they recognise, okay, there are so many opportunities that are going to present themselves through this process. Let's enjoy those. You know, I'm going to be able to be much more social. I am going to be able to have time for hobbies and activities that I've maybe never even tried before or have neglected for so long since my childhood. I'm going to have time to actually invest in my friendships. I'm going to have time to enjoy foods that I probably haven't given myself permission to enjoy for a really long time. So I think, yeah, focusing on the opportunity that presents itself is so important for people in that position, because it can seem incredibly daunting and it can seem quite a miserable process to go through when you've been so focused on things like being as lean as possible, your body weight, stepping on stage, everything being external appearance focused for so long, and you've had this meticulous control for so long. It can be really uncomfortable to let go of that control. So yeah, focusing on the opportunity. And I would also send them away to have a think about what they really value in life, you know, establish their core values. And if I get someone to do that as well, I also get them to write out underneath each core value an example of how they're going to act in line with that value each day.
Like that.
So that they've actually got direction, and it's not just like, oh yeah, I value connection. But it's like, okay, so how are you going to implement that into your life and make sure that you're acting in line with that? So yeah, establishing values, recognizing the opportunity that's in front of them, and also just making sure that they know what to expect. They're going to have to gain body fat. They're going to have to increase food. They're going to have to decrease expenditure. It's going to be uncomfortable. Like, making sure that they recognize that is so important, because if they don't, once they feel that discomfort and they feel like things are going quote unquote wrong, even though they're not, they're going to really struggle to follow through. Whereas if they know to expect that discomfort and they know to expect those challenges, they're going to be so much more likely to push through, because they're going to see it as worth it. They're going to know to expect that as a part of the process, but they know where they're heading is worth that discomfort, and they will get out of the other side of it. And it can feel so like wonderful for people to get through that, and so like liberating. It's almost like letting go of chains, because you're letting go of that control that you've had for so long, and the sort of control that maybe nutrition and training has had over you for such a long time as well. So yeah, focus on the opportunity that's present.
I love that. That's such a great answer. There's a few amazing points in there. I really love that you highlighted a couple of times that it will be a bit uncomfortable and kind of need to lean into that discomfort. I think a lot of the time I see people expect it to be like, this should be easy, because in theory it should be. You get to do a bit less, eat a bit more. Like, in theory that's easier. And then as soon as it isn't easier for the individual, they think, okay, I'm kind of broken, I'm not doing this properly, because this should in theory be easier, and it's actually not easier for me. So just knowing that it's not easier in a way, and it's absolutely fine that it will be uncomfortable for you, I think that in itself is quite empowering.
100%. And another thing I didn't mention there actually is just recognising the new measures of progress that we're going to use moving forwards, and switching the focus. Because especially if someone's come out of a background of doing transformations or like bodybuilding shows, they've probably throughout years been using progress pictures, scale weight, maybe measurements, posing videos as their measure of progress. So it's like, okay, they're not relevant anymore.
No, not the right tool.
No, it's not the right tool. So let's focus on other things. Like, one thing that I'll get my clients to do when they first come on board with me is fill in an initial questionnaire. And a few of the questions are like, how do you feel your body image is right now on a scale of 0 to 10, and give them examples, like 0 being horrendous, can't stand the sight of myself in the mirror, my thoughts around my body are really negative, and then 10 is great, like I love my body, you know, I fully accept myself as I am. And then we'll do that again further into the coaching process to see how far they've come, and that can be a really good tool to measure progress, as well as things like menstrual cycle function and things like that, as well as just, you know, the standard things, rather than focusing on scale weight and progress pictures excessively. I still do with some clients use progress pictures, especially if they do have body composition related goals, which is fine, but it's just not the focus area, and they don't need to be doing it every single week.
Yeah, 100%. I love that you said that. I actually had a call last night with a girl, and she's trained like on and off for years, and so she literally just expected, she was like, cool, well I'll grab some progress pics and send them over, like just as a passing comment, because in her mind it was just like the expectation, right? And I was like, no. She was like, what do you mean? She's like, how are we going to measure progress? And I was like, say your goals like back to me, like just summarize what we've just spent 45 minutes talking about. And then she like said, like, yeah, I'm not happy with my body image, and I'm underweight, and I need to up my calories, I need to get my cycle back. So what one of those is related? Like, what one of those can we measure with progress pictures? She was like, oh yeah. I was like, well, I should get rid of your scale too.
Yeah, exactly. Scale weight's another one. I think a lot of people have a really strong attachment to it, so it's really difficult to initially remove it. But one thing I'll say to people is, right, okay, let's remove your scale weight for 2 weeks. If you feel worse after doing that, I'll let you bring it back in. But if you feel better, the deal is that we keep it out, okay?
I like that.
And just see how they get on, because then they know it's not it doesn't have to be permanent. 2 weeks, just see how you feel. If you feel better, let's continue without your scale weight.
No, that's really cool. Nice little like compromises as well. And most people feel better when they're not jumping on it. So I imagine the scale doesn't come back in often, does it?
No, I don't think I've had one circumstance where it's actually come back in.
Yeah. But no, that's like, I just want to highlight how important that is, because I still see so many coaches using scale weight and progress photos of every client by default, because they just think that's what they should do. But it's like, what is the client's goals, and can you actually measure those goals with those things? And sometimes it's not the right tool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was like such a great answer. I think going back to when you said about they were kind of like, you get the clients journaling on their values. One thing I love that you said was like, underneath that, how you're going to actually like action that, or like something you can do today. I thought that was really cool, because otherwise it does sound a bit like wishy-washy, doesn't it, when you're talking about like journaling your values, and that puts it into something that's very actionable. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And it gives people direction and something to focus on, rather than them being like, okay, yeah, this is my value, but what does that actually mean? Like, how can I actually use that? So I think it's a really, really valuable thing for people to do. And then you can also, if you do that, you can hold you can hold your clients accountable to, have you done this? Have you actually put this into practice? Have you been acting in line with that value in the way that you said you would? If not, let's go back and make sure that we're doing that. Or we recognize that maybe that actually wasn't so important to you, and you have a different set of values.
Yeah, amazing. I'd love a little bit of insight into that. So if you're someone listening that's going, okay, cool, I'm kind of self-coaching myself through this journey, there's been loads of like really great tips here. Like, how would they kind of like check in, reevaluate and reflect on this, and kind of then inside that same answer, if you're a coach listening that's interested in like how you do that as a coach from like a check-in perspective, like what does that kind of check-in process look like? Yeah,
so I think it is client dependent, and something that I quite like is I use a platform where I can personalize the check-in form to the client.
Cool.
So if someone, for example, is struggling with their body image, there will be a question that says, have you had any body image struggles this week? If so, how have you dealt with them? If they're a client who, going back to values, if they've been working on acting in line with their values so that they feel their best selves and they're heading in the direction that they want to head, one of the questions might be, how have you acted in line with this value this week? And that's a way that, if someone's self-coaching, they could do that with themselves within journaling. Once a week, they could ask themselves the question of, how have I acted in line with my values this week? If not, how can I do so this week coming? And it's just that element of accountability and reflection that will really help make sure that they're heading in the direction they want to head. And like I said, people can do that with themselves within journaling. Coaches, include it in your check-in forms. Ask your clients about these things. And talk to them about aspects of the coaching process beyond just training, nutrition, energy expenditure, all of these things. So yeah, journaling is a great tool. Even just talking to your friends, if you want to have a conversation with someone close to you and say, do you want to hold each other accountable to this? Like what, share your values maybe. It might lead to a deeper connection with a friend, which could be great if you don't have a coach to work with. So yeah, maybe you use your friend for accountability or something like that. But from a coaching perspective, I just make sure that I'm talking to my clients regularly and they have questions relevant to what they're working on in their check-in form, and that I check in with them and ask what their values are. And I have that initial Q&A that says their values when they started with me, and we can come back to that every now and again and reassess, because I think it's really important to recognise that your values can change throughout your life, and that's okay. You might go through a period where you're bodybuilding, one of your core values is actually aesthetics. That's okay. You might come out of that and that might change.
Yeah, no, exactly. Perfect. If someone, I've got two questions from that actually. That was amazing. Do you ever kind of have issues where you get clients to really like struggle? Do you ever struggle to get clients to open up about these kind of conversations? Like they're expecting a little bit more macros this, training that, and they don't really want to kind of engage in these types of conversations and answer these types of questions?
Yes, sometimes. And just for the record, I don't make every client do things like journaling. For some people it doesn't work, and that's okay. It's about recognising what tools work for the individual and utilising those and making sure the clients stay consistent with those. So yeah, not every client journals. I don't force anyone to do anything. If someone I feel like needs to open up a little bit more, but they're not willing at first, they're a little bit resistant to it, I'll take a really steady approach and to start with, I won't force them to open up about anything, but it might be that I'll just drop the odd question in as time goes on. And as they learn that they can trust me and there's no judgment from me whatsoever, and then encourage them to open up over time, rather than from day one being like, tell me all of your values, tell me how you're going to act in line with them, you know, tell me about your personal life. Some people don't want to do that, that's okay, but just maybe try and nurture them over time, or find ways in which you might be able to encourage them to open up to themselves, and then they can start to work through those things in their own company, as opposed to feeling like they have to share it with you, and they might then feel open to sharing things with you further down the line.
Yeah, no, amazing. That's really cool. I mean, what would that potentially look like? I know obviously it's going to vary a lot depending on the person, but what would some like tips be to give someone to become a little bit more vulnerable and have those conversations with themselves?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if someone's really struggling, like, go seek therapy. I've been to therapy myself, because actually being vulnerable was something that I really struggled with personally. So that helped me massively, because it just provided a safe space for me to share my emotions, and it was an absolute game changer. So yeah, if someone's really struggling, go and seek therapy or something along those lines. But if you're not severely struggling, or you just want to get started on your own, or maybe you can't afford therapy, then things like just, you know, journaling can help. Like I said, asking yourself the question, are there any feelings or emotions coming up right now? And if so, where are they stemming from? And just trying to get in touch with that. You can use something called the feelings wheel as well to help you identify different feelings and emotions, because a lot of people aren't aware of what they're feeling. Whereas if they see, you know, the different emotions and feelings out in front of them and what they can be related to, it can help them establish what they're feeling. And also like just checking in with your body physically, and asking yourself, how do I feel physically? Do I feel tense? Do I feel relaxed? That sort of thing can really help. And, you know, practicing mindfulness and actually making space and time to feel is super important, because I think that's the reason a lot of people struggle with being vulnerable and expressing their emotions and things, because they don't actually allow themselves the time to do that.
They don't have time.
Yeah. So that's one of the issues. You need to actually make time to just be still and allow yourself to express those things.
I'm too busy to feel. Literally, it sounds a bit silly, doesn't it, when you say it like that?
Like, I don't have time, or it is uncomfortable. Yeah. Yes, it is. But vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. And I think recognizing that is super important.
Yeah, 100%. Another point you said, which I thought was great, was, you know, sometimes it might be more comfortable to kind of have this conversation with a friend rather than a coach, or if you're not working with a coach. If someone doesn't feel like they've got a friend which they can maybe have these conversations with, is there any advice you'd give for kind of like forming new connections or finding a new community?
Do you know what? This is funny you ask this, because I keep getting asked this question on Instagram. People are like, how do you meet people? How have you like gone out? And because I've met a lot of people, I think, in my 20s, as opposed to growing up with like my closest friends. My best friend, Lydia, we met in the gym.
Okay.
And I actually went up to her in the gym and just started a conversation, because she actually does go out with my kind of step cousin. And they were in the gym and she was training with them. So I just went up to her and I was like, oh, hey, like I kind of knew of her, because everyone in Sheffield kind of knows of each other in the fitness industry.
Right.
So yeah, we started a conversation, and then we became very close very quickly, and we're now best friends. So I think, again, you're just going to have to get outside of your comfort zone, but just start conversations and ask yourself, what have you got to lose by starting a conversation with somebody? And if you're too scared to do it in person, drop them a message on social media, or just, I don't know, drop them a comment or something, or react to their story and maybe start a conversation. And ask yourself, if someone reached out to me and said, oh, by the way, like, let me know if you fancy grabbing a coffee sometime, or if they started a conversation, how would you react? Because a lot of the time it would be positively, and you'd really appreciate that. So flip that on its head and don't be afraid to reach out to other people. And like I said, if you're too scared to do it in person, just drop them a DM or something, because you've got nothing to lose. Yeah, literally. And if they ignore your DM, so what? Yeah. At least you put yourself out there. But I think going to, you know, the gym's a great place, or I used to go to pole dancing. That was great for like meeting people, and yoga, you know, any group classes or anything like that are great. In Manchester, there's a network called Manchester Young Professionals, and they run event for young professionals.
I've seen you tag them in stories.
They run events for young professionals in Manchester. So I've met quite a lot of new people through that, and that's been great. I've met people in coffee shops. Like, yeah, just you've got to be open-minded to it though, and you can't be headphones in all the time looking down at your phone. Like, open yourself up to new connections by taking your earphones out, making sure that you're looking up, you're actually engaging with people. If you're ordering a coffee, actually talk to the person you're ordering a coffee from. Little things like that. I think that's why people struggle to connect these days, because they're not opening themselves up to it.
I love that answer. That's the reason I'm smiling so much is it's the biggest, like when you've lived somewhere like Phuket where I spent a few years, that's just the default.
Yeah.
Like no one really has headphones in the coffee shops. Like most people have gone there by themselves. It's when you're there and you're not Thai, you're kind of the minority. So you just instantly have something in common, even if the other person's like American, Australian, Scandinavian. And you're all there for like something health and fitness related. So like that's just life there.
Yeah.
But like here, you come back here and it's like no one talks to anyone.
I must admit it's worse here than up north.
Yeah, it's every time I go to Manchester, I'm like, I love this city.
Yeah, people talk to each other much more often up north, like in Manchester especially. But again, like here, I think if you were just a bit more open to connection, you'd probably have more. But yeah, I think, do you know what you mentioned, Phuket? Like, I think traveling helps as well. Like if people can push themselves to go places on their own, you're more likely to speak to people.
Got no choice.
Yeah, you've literally got no choice. So I've kind of, I went a few places on my own last year, which was really, really good. And you just learn to get over it and talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can't move up north from the south, then go traveling instead.
Yeah. Just come up north. And then if not, get yourself off to Thailand.
You laugh, but like there's a girl I'm friends with actually. She's great, and it's funny because that story you said a minute ago was like the exact same thing between two girls that I was friends with, and I was friends with both of them. And I noticed that they were like hanging out. I was like, oh, how did you two start chatting? And this one girl was like, I literally just loved how this girl lifts, and I just walked up to her in the gym and was like, hey, like literally just said, I think we should be friends.
I've got another story actually. A girl in we have communal workspaces in our apartment building. So I was working in one of the communal spaces, and there was a guy and a girl sat next to me, and they were talking about some kind of app, and they were talking about fitness, something fitness related. So I was like, oh, hey guys, do you mind me asking what you do? And just started the conversation. And now me and Lauren are friends. So again, just talk to people and express your interest, put yourself out there.
Yeah, 100%. Ironically, if you're dieting really hard, you're probably not going to have the energy or the confidence to do that, are you?
Just stop dieting.
So it becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle, doesn't it? So maybe just stop dieting.
That's that you tend to, that is a really good point though. You do tend to isolate yourself when you're dieting, and that's not good for our health to live in isolation and neglect connection. So yeah.
I think that, that environment is so key. Like something that I kind of forgot about, and I was working at essentially a CrossFit box, and then I left there. I train my clients out of a different gym now, 10 minutes away, and it's like a bodybuilding gym. Great gym, great equipment, lovely people. And all you hear is like, I'm not allowed beetroot on my plan. And it's just like, I kind of forgot this world existed.
Yeah.
And the entire conversation is always about aesthetics and prep this and like, what whey powder are you having? And it's like, oh, have you seen Trained by JP's new cream of rice flavor? And I'm just like, oh my God. And like, that's obviously absolutely fine if that's what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. I just literally forgot that world existed. And what it made me realize was I'm hearing all these like girls in particular talk about, I'm overhearing it when I'm there, like trying to do a check-in between clients or whatever on my laptop. And I'm hearing these conversations, and a lot of them are quite sad. They're kind of like what we've been talking about today. And having come from a CrossFit box where like there is zero conversation about aesthetics, and even if we do talk about body weight, it's literally in the context of, if I weigh a bit less, my gymnastics would be better, or I'd be able to run faster, or I need to lose some weight to be better at high rocks. Like if there's ever a weight gain or a weight loss goal, it's literally for performance. It's not for aesthetics. And I don't think I quite appreciated how much of a healthier environment that was, because the conversation's all just about, okay, it can still be extreme, it can still be unhealthy, but it's no one there has, body image issues really. No one there's really worried about their body fat percentage. Like they're all there talking about how many calories per hour you're pulling on the rower. And I've come to this bodybuilding gym, and it's just really highlighted for me like how important I think it is that if you are struggling with this, you should maybe even like try and remove yourself from like where you train and who you train with, because some of the conversations I'm hearing are like so toxic, and I just forgot that world existed. That's
what I personally moved away from the bodybuilding gym immediately in 2020 when I finished that prep. And initially I moved to a gym that was kind of high-end commercial / bodybuilding, so a bit of a mixture of the two. But again, it was just really refreshing for me to move to that. And then I also went to a CrossFit box, which, yeah, very refreshing, and loved that. But somebody said to me, they were like, you can't heal in
the same environment that made you sick.
And I was like, yeah, that's so
saying.
true. So I just moved.
Yeah.
I was like, when they said that, I was like, oh, yeah okay, I need to move.
I actually have got a caption typed up in notes with that exact saying, based on the fact, I think it was like 2 days ago, it was when this woman was like, I'm not allowed beetroot. And she was saying about how her blood pressure is really high.
Right.
And I see her like grinding out really horrible sets on the leg press. And I'm like, probably shouldn't be doing that if you're on prep with high blood pressure. And then this guy was like to her, oh, you should add beetroot in for your blood pressure. And she was like, I'm not allowed beetroot. And I was just like, what am I listening to? And I actually wrote a little caption up about what I kind of just explained there, and maybe changing your environment. And that's the exact phrase, the exact saying that I put in notes in my phone.
I love it. And I think it's really useful for so many people in so many different situations. So yeah, love that saying. Yeah,
I think a lot of these, like a lot of the things we're saying, they sound a little bit drastic, don't they? Which puts a lot of people off. Like, I need to change gyms, or I need to go traveling, or I need to sign up to a new young networks, like professional, network or community. Like, they often sound quite drastic, but it's like, what's the alternative? Like, if you're not happy and your health's not great, then maybe you do need to do something that's a bit drastic.
100%. And it's, like I said, it's uncomfortable, these things, but nothing good comes from just staying in your comfort zone. Like, you've got to, I know that's really cliche, but you've got to push yourself out of it. And if you want to progress in life, you've got to learn to get a little bit uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. What are you up to at the moment? You've got another High Rocks planned. How is your own training going? What are you personally working towards?
So I haven't got another High Rocks planned, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's quite relevant. Is that I didn't come on period for the first time since I competed when I was training for High Rocks.
Wow.
I was fine when I was training for doubles. Absolutely fine, did doubles, cool. But then I started training for individual High Rocks, and my sessions started to get longer and more intense. And I tend to train in the morning, so after not too much fuel, I do have something, but after not too much, and it just suits my life. And I was like, right, okay, I can either go down the route of starting to track my food again, making sure that I'm overfeeding, starting to train later in the day, restructuring my day, that sort of thing. Or I can actually just take a step back from High Rocks. So I took a step back from High Rocks because I'm in such a great place with food, my body, and training now. Like, I feel like I've got this great sort of, I hate the word, but balance of everything. And I just don't want to sacrifice that again. I don't want to get back into meticulously tracking my food. I don't want to get back into structuring my day around training and all of these things. So actually pursuing that goal was not worth it for me if it was going to potentially sacrifice menstrual cycle function. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier about me being much less resilient to stress, whether that be psychological or physical, because I've lost my menstrual cycle in the past and I've pushed my body to such an extreme. So the sacrifice just wasn't worth it for me, and I decided to take a step back. So no High Rocks. My training is now just a mixture of, I do a bit of running, I do some resistance training, mainly just glute hamstring focused stuff, to be completely honest. And I do some functional work, and it's mainly just for health, fitness, and to make me feel good. And then to maintain the condition that I'm in, essentially, and maintain the muscle mass that I've got. But I'm not trying to like grow maximally or anything like that. And I'm much more relaxed around my training than I ever have been, which is wonderful. So yeah, that's me personally. I'm just kind of happy maintaining and being like healthy and happy. And then
love that.
Yeah, professionally, me and Charlie have the Flourishing Society, which has been going actually for a year now. So that's been great. And we have just launched our course for coaches, which is a mentorship course called the Flourishing Coach. And it's essentially where we help coaches help their clients with their body image, relationship with food, menstrual cycle function, and overall health. And we are also creating quite a tight-knit community as a part of it, because we're having like group Zoom calls where people can bring client case studies and that sort of thing. So we've got that running at the moment, and we're launching a second course later in the year, which is called the Flourishing Lifestyle, which we're really excited for. We're running events as a part of that. And I also have my own one-to-one coaching service, which I love.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Before we kind of get into the business stuff, just quickly, I'd love to say, thank you for sharing that regarding kind of high rocks in your own cycle. I think that would be really valuable for people to hear, especially since it just shows we're not bashing bikini comp prep necessarily.
No.
It can happen even if you're not on comp prep. So thank you for sharing that. But there's a few amazing things that you're up to business wise. So feel free to tell people where they can find out a little bit more about all of them. So if you're a potential client listening, and then if you're a coach listening.
Yeah, so you can all head to the same place really. So my Instagram is Danni Bosworth, probably the best place to go. And then the link in my link tree will take you to everywhere else. And the Flourishing Society is on Instagram as the flourishing.society. And you're welcome to DM me at any point. I don't bite, I promise. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's honestly true because I DM'd you being like, "Hey, Danni, you don't know me, but I just fancied doing a podcast." So, which I really appreciate you saying yes to. So, if you're listening, then take Danni up on that offer. The DMs are genuinely open. So, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Obviously, we covered a lot of like really amazing things there. Is there anything you feel like we missed, or you wanted to add in just to kind of round that off?
I think we covered everything really nicely there. I'd just say, like, as a takeaway, make sure that you do what's right for you. You trust your intuition and make sure that you know what your values are and you're acting in line with them. But yeah.
Unreal. Really strong finish. I love that to round it off. Obviously, you've just listed off where people can find you already, so that's perfect. Obviously, we'll make sure all of that is in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here, Danni. I really appreciate your time. I think that's a really important conversation. I'm really excited for people to hear it, and I'm sure you'll kind of get some questions on the back of it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.